Right, let's continue to analyze the DA's elective Congress once again with TK Boy, public policy specialist at the Wits School of Governance, says we wrap up this Congress, TK. Before we discuss what this means, John Steenhuisen winning this race for leader of the DA, getting another term. Let's just listen to what he had to say on his second term, his victory speech. Let's take a listen and watch.
I am humbled to stand before all of you today to answer the call that you have made during this historic Congress. And my answer to you is a resounding yes. Yes, I will work with each and every one of you to lead the DA into the national government in 2024.
So, TK, it seems that those who are backing John Steenhuisen, particularly the old guard, would not have been surprised by this. What does it mean, not only for the DA, but for the country, a second term for John Steenhuisen, especially as he says they're moon shooting to 2024?
Well, I think for the party, kind of signals that, look, they feel confident that they've consolidated power within the Democratic Alliance, especially on the ideological lines, that they've gone for a hard form of liberalism. And it seems as though everybody will toe the line when it comes to that. Now, what it means for the country, well, look, it's a bit hard to say, because of anything, the argument can be made, and I think one of your SABC staff members said this, that it actually it harkens back to the DA under Mr. Tony Leon. Now, as skilled politician as Mr. Tony Leon was, he was facing, one might say, look, who would want to face President Nelson Mandela and President Mbeki? Those are not exactly that probably is like the worst combination. But it also kind of says to me that DA is kind of going backwards. If I may maybe interpret this idea of a moonshot, originally meant going for a great idea, something which captures the mind. Now, if capturing the mind here simply is putting the ANC under 50, that is such a low bar that I'm not sure if you should call it a moonshot or simply jumping over a broken fence.
There was one pundit who was saying that this term is an opportunity for John Steenhuisen to walk out from under the shadow of the re-elected federal chairperson, Helen Zille. Your thoughts about this? And I also want to reflect on the fact that you had the Congress presiding officer, Greg Crumbook, saying that the final percentages of the election results could not have been provided then when he was speaking about it. How important is that to understand, particularly if one is to understand the internal politics of the DA, which some have viewed as in itself counterproductive to changing how they're viewed and the share of the electorate vote?
Well, on the first point you ask about Mr. Steenhuisen and his relationship with Ms. Helen Zille, look, it's an odd one, because I doubt Mr. Steenhuisen, he doesn't seem to have the personality to get over someone like Ms. Helen Zille, because she is a political force for the positive or for the negative. So the way one kind of interprets it is they seem to have a good working relationship, and they seem to allow each other to live in whatever lanes that they both choose to be. So I don't really find it to be a major thing. It's just how he will handle that. And I think that is what you're probably hinting towards, because it will come up in the election when people do take shots at the DA. So it'll be interesting how he handles that. Because operationally, I don't really think I think it's actually, they're both the same personalities as regards to they believe in this new liberalism or the old liberalism of the DA. Now, as it relates to the second question you're asking about the victory of the margin, look, I think everybody expects it to be a large, if you're just looking particularly at the fight for the position Mr. Steenhuisen has. I think that's what people really want to see. How large was the vote against Dr. Palatse? It's interesting, but I think for me, it's almost done and dusted. So yes, it'll be interesting to see whether it was an 80 or a 90%, or maybe she actually managed to get into the 70s or 60s. But in terms of a final result, it's done. There's nothing really much to interpret. It'll be just for those people to really see how big the margin was.
All right, so I want us to listen in on what John Steenhuisen had to say, particularly about the EFF being declared public enemy #1 for the Democratic Alliance and what the ramifications are for this in terms of the political landscape. Here's a look.
I publicly declare Julius Malema's EFF to be political enemy #1 of the Democratic Alliance. And I commit the DA to fight back against the EFF at every turn, with the ultimate aim of defeating the doomsday coalition that could seal South Africa's fate next year. This is no longer about politics, Democrats. It's about the survival of democracy and the survival of South Africa.
Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this, TK. You and I spoke about it yesterday, about the existential challenges for the Democratic Alliance. Some saying that without the ANC and the problems that the ANC faces, it would be difficult for the DA to garner as much support as it has. So your thoughts on the DA and through Steenhuisen now seeing and predicting that the EFF and the ANC are now one and they will work together in 2024. Is it as cut and dried as that?
Well, not necessarily. I think just 2 points on it. One, it kind of harkens back to the discussion we had last night, which is to say it's a missed opportunity. By that I mean, look, what he should have said is we declare unemployment, we declare inequality, we declare the fact that South Africa is moving backwards as the enemy. But when you center what your party is towards an individual, especially an opposition party, which is, if I'm not mistaken, about 10% which back behind you, it almost says that you kind of are a bit scared, and you kind of don't actually, your only direction is to almost do what is not really common in South African politics, which is to characterize and go after individuals and parties. It's not really how South Africans like to see things being campaigned. Hence, I said it goes back to the DA of the Tony Leon. Now, to put the ANC together with the EFF is more of a political strategy, just to say, listen, voters out there, if you are voting for the EFF, or if you partially are to the ANC, just remember that if things don't go well, these two could come together. Now, I think while this might be good for the constituency the DA is aiming towards, if you're the EFF, you should be glad that Mr. Steenhuisen has said this, because one, he just gave you free airtime at their National Congress, and two, it really does kind of put all those old adages about the DA to the rest, and to say, listen, the EFF can literally spin this for the next, going into the election, that look at that political party that when we speak about progress, when we speak about helping a certain population, that mark us out as enemy. So for me, it really is a political misstep. Yes, and it says to me that they seem to be going back to a mentality of saying, let's only focus on the bad, and let's not really give South Africans anything to look forward to, in the sense that what we wanted to hear was, DA, what is your future? What is really your moonshot for things like unemployment in South Africa? But it seems to be, it's the ANC, it's the EFF, which is a cardinal mistake the DA always seems to make.
All right, now let's listen to this last excerpt of John Steenhuisen, particularly how, at least from what I see, how he characterizes multi-party democracy going forward and perhaps greater regulation thereof, how it's going to be run. Here's a look.
In my capacity as leader, not only of the DA, but of the opposition alternative in our country, our party will immediately initiate a process to form a pre-election moonshot pact with like-minded political parties, civil society organizations, and civic movements to defeat the ANC, to keep the EFF out, and to inaugurate a new national opposition coalition government. The purpose of this pact will to be forge coordination and unity of purpose between all organizations that want to defeat the ANC and keep the EFF out. To achieve this moonshot, we need a whole of society approach that builds an entirely new ecosystem of change in our country.
Can you talk about a moonshot that is principial? If you say it exists, if all parties agree to be in opposition of the ANC and EFF. And I ask this against the backdrop of what you mentioned earlier on, the democratic, strategic efforts that they're undertaking, or can that be seen as deconsolidation? Will it backfire?
Well, look, I think we have to give them credit for it's a bit of an innovation, and I think it needs to be welcome. However, it runs into one key critical factor, which is to say, if, as the clip says, and if we listen to the rest of the speech, it's almost like saying you are allowed to come play in my sandpit according to my rules. Now, if you're an opposition party, I guess they've already excluded the EFF. How does that really sound? Because what you basically are saying is, we're basically going to go to the elections under the banner of the Democratic Alliance. So you now have to go negotiate with your own constituency, which says, listen, we don't mind if you work with the DA at the council level, but to be dictated to, because this is what ultimately will become. Because as he says in his speech that, listen, you're coming into play on our terminology, it becomes quite problematic. And while I say it's an innovation, I think it kind of runs into the problem the DA has been running into outside of the Western Cape. Namely, they come across as an overbearing and quite an arrogant party, which doesn't want to hear the views of other people. What if another political party says, okay, listen, while we don't agree with liberalism, this is what we agree with. And what if the other political parties say, yes, the ANC is a problem, but I think we offer an alternative vision. We can't go into an election only harping on about the ANC and the EFF. That basically means we're going to be outside the sandpit. So while it's an innovation, it kind of lays bare some of the problems of the thinking of the DA, namely that they almost seem to refuse to understand that you need to compromise and you need to allow other people to come up with ideas. And it's sometimes great to listen to other people and let them lead.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. Just unpacking the outcome of that leadership race and some of the issues that came out of that. TK Pooe, public policy specialist at Wits School of Governance, just sharing his views on that democratic renewal. That seems to be the headline of what the 2024 strategy is, the Democratic Alliance. More news on that coming up later on.